Northern Montana, November 2025. The blizzard bit deep, but it was the smell that truly froze us. Wet fur, iron, and an insidious undertone of human sweat rot and copper blood. We were JSOC Recon, specialized in biological containment, sent to a decommissioned Cold War bunker known as Site Echo7. They told the press it was an old lab. They told us it was a routine clearance. They lied. What we found buried under that mountain wasn't just dormant research. It was a lair. And what lived there wasn't human, not anymore. Every groan of metal in the dark, every impossible claw mark, every distant rattling growl, it all built to one terrifying certainty. We weren't just clearing a site, we were entering a hunt, and we were the prey. Prepare yourself. Because this is the story they tried to bury, the truth about what waits in the shadows, caught between man and beast, and still hungry. November 2025. The cold in northern Montana wasn't just a temperature, it was a physical presence, a clawing absence of warmth that threatened to seize your breath with every inhale. Our bird, a modified Chinook, bucked and groaned against a blizzard that slammed into the Blackfoot Range like a pissed-off god. Inside, strapped into my seat with a dozen other ghosts from Bravo 4, the rhythmic thrum of the rotor blades was less a comfort and more a prelude to a headache. We were JSOC Recon, specialized in biological containment. Translation: we were the guys who got called when things went so far sideways, the CDC wouldn't touch it, and PR would have a collective aneurysm. Our target, Site Echo7. A name that tasted like rust and forgotten secrets. Officially, it was an old Cold War biolab, off the map since the 80s. Unofficially, Command had been getting some peculiar data, heat signatures from a facility supposedly abandoned for decades, drones that started malfunctioning within a mile radius, their feeds dissolving into static snow, motion sensors picking up movement, deep underground, not seismic activity, not groundwater. Movement, intelligent, deliberate movement. Command wanted answers. We were the blunt instrument designed to retrieve them. The air in the cabin was thick with the scent of recycled oxygen, old metal, and the faint coppery tang of apprehension. But even through all that, even pressed up against the thin shell of the bird, I could smell something else. Something wrong. It was subtle at first, almost like a trick of the exhaust fumes, but it grew stronger the closer we got. Wet fur, iron, a wild, untamed scent that didn't belong in the sterile environment of a military transport. Kearns, a burly optics specialist with a perpetual smirk, caught my eye. He sniffed the air theatrically, then grinned. Smells like a bear den cap. Maybe some grizzlies decided to hibernate in the HVAC. A few of the guys chuckled, a nervous, forced sound. I didn't laugh. The cold outside was a living thing, clawing at the windows, but the smell hinted at something else entirely. Something predatory. Our comms were already sketchy, just fractured bursts of static from command. Satellite uplink was out. Our nav systems were struggling. We were flying blind, guided by outdated topographical maps and the gut feeling of a pilot who'd seen too many black sites. The peaks of the Blackfoot Range, normally formidable and majestic, were now just indistinct, swirling blurs in the whiteout. This wasn't just bad weather. It felt like the mountain itself was trying to push us away, a silent, primal warning. Brace for landing. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, tight with strain. The Chinook pitched violently, then dropped like a stone, the sudden loss of altitude sending my stomach into my throat. Outside, the rotor wash turned the blizzard into a maelstrom, kicking up powdered ice and snapping the branches of long-dead pines like dry bone. The impact was jarring, a shuddering crunch that rattled my teeth. We were down. The ramp hissed open, revealing a world of pure, blinding white. Snow hammered at us, stinging exposed skin, instantly frosting over the visors of our tactical helmets. The wind howled, a banshee's scream ripping through the desolate landscape. It was colder than anything I'd ever felt, a cold that seeped into your bones and froze the marrow. But that smell, it was even stronger out here, rawer, The musk of a wild animal, damp and earthy, mingled with something metallic and vaguely sweet, like spilled blood on fresh snow. It clung to the air, refusing to dissipate in the gale. "All right, Bravo 4, let's move." My voice, amplified by the comms, sounded flat against the roar of the wind. We stepped out, sinking knee-deep into fresh powder, our heavy gear suddenly feeling like lead weights. The site was invisible, buried under layers of snow and the sheer malice of the weather. But I knew it was there. I felt it. A palpable sense of dread, a cold knot in my gut that had nothing to do with the freezing temperatures. We were in a place where the world felt inverted, where the natural order was twisted. And whatever was causing that smell, whatever had made those heat signatures return, it wasn't a hibernating bear. It was something else, something ancient, and very, very hungry. We began our slow, painstaking trek towards the coordinates, each step a testament to sheer willpower against the onslaught of the storm. The mountain was a tomb, and we were its unwelcome excavators. The main access tunnel had collapsed decades ago, a concrete mouth choked with rock and ice. Our engineers, however, were an inventive bunch. With thermal lances and hydraulic cutters, they spent the next 2 hours battling the permafrost and rebar, a grueling, spark-filled ballet against the elements. The air was a symphony of grinding metal and sizzling ice, punctuated by the occasional curse from Miller, our lead breach specialist. My team maintained a perimeter, our weapons at the ready, but there was nothing to see in the swirling white void outside. Only the wind and that omnipresent, unsettling scent. Then, with a final groan of twisting metal, a secondary breach was made. A dark maw opened in the side of the mountain, revealing not the expected icy cold, but a rush of warm, stale air. It hit us like a physical wave, 10 degrees warmer than the outside, and laden with the smell that had plagued us since landing. Here, it was overwhelming. A thick, musky animal odor, but with a new, horrifying dimension. The undeniable undertone of human sweat and something metallic, like copper blood, clinging to the air like a shroud. "All right, Bravo, clear and enter," I ordered, my voice tight. My breath plumed white in the relative warmth, a stark contrast to the blizzard we'd left behind. One by one, we descended into the darkness, our weapon lights cutting through the gloom. The interior was a stark utilitarian concrete corridor, utilitarian and Cold War era. Dim emergency lights flickered overhead, powered by something deep within the complex. We could hear it now too, a low rhythmic hum. The thrum of ancient generators still alive, still pumping power through this subterranean heart. It was a sound that should have been reassuring, a sign of life, but it felt more like a slow, deliberate heartbeat, a pulse from a sleeping beast. The deeper we ventured, the more the mundane gave way to the monstrous. The plain concrete walls, initially smooth and unmarred, began to change. First isolated scratches, then shallow grooves. Soon the scratches became scores, and the grooves became trenches, deep, ragged gouges that tore through the reinforced concrete as if it were soft clay. They weren't mere abrasions. These were deliberate marks, carved by something with immense power and sharp, unyielding appendages. I ran a gloved hand over one particularly deep furrow. It felt like a chisel had gone through it. "Jesus Christ," Kearns breathed, his helmet light sweeping across a particularly mangled section. What kind of demolition did they have going on down here? Miller, ever the pragmatist, chimed in. "Could be anything, Captain. Machinery accidents. Maybe some of the lab animals got out and went feral. Big ones too, by the looks of it." "Feral animals don't carve through steel mesh like this," Ortiz muttered, pointing his weapon light at a section where the rebar reinforcement was twisted and torn, not cut, but ripped from the concrete. "This is beyond anything a bear could do, even a pissed-off grizzly." I didn't offer a theory. My gut was clenching, tightening with each new impossible detail. The smell was now so strong it coated my tongue, a cloying, primal stench that prickled the hairs on my arms. We moved slowly, our footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence, punctuated only by the generator's thrum and the soft scuff of our boots. Each shadow seemed to lengthen, to deepen, to hold untold secrets. The air was heavy, charged with an unspoken dread. It felt like we were walking into the mouth of something vast and ancient, something that had been waiting for us. The initial dismissals of lab damage or feral animals felt increasingly flimsy, replaced by a growing, sickening certainty that whatever caused these marks was far more terrible, far more intelligent than we wanted to believe. The whispers in the wall weren't just the echoes of the past. They were a prelude to something still very much alive. Our progress into Echo 7 felt less like an exploration and more like an archaeological dig into a tomb. Every turn in the corridor brought a fresh layer of unsettling revelation. We eventually reached what the schematic called Living Quarters Alpha. The sight that greeted us was disturbing. The doors to these rooms, unlike the others we'd encountered, were reinforced. Not from the outside, as you'd expect for security, but from the inside. Thick, crude steel plates had been welded over the existing entry points, makeshift barricades that spoke of desperation. It raised a chilling question. What were they trying to keep out? Or more terrifyingly, what were they trying to keep in? We breached the first door, a slow metallic groan protesting its forced opening. The room inside was a time capsule of terror. Bunks were overturned, their frames twisted like discarded toys. Lockers were pried open, their contents scattered. Papers, documents, personal effects, all fused to the floor by ancient stains. Not rust, not water damage. Something darker, something almost oily and reddish-brown. Years of decay hardening it into a macabre veneer. The air in these rooms was colder than the main corridors, as if the fear within had frozen the very molecules. "Check every room. Don't touch anything until cleared," I ordered, my voice hushed. Even through the comms, I could hear the subtle tremor in my own tone. This wasn't just an abandoned facility. It was a crime scene, decades in the making. We moved from room to room, each a variation of the same nightmare. Some bunks were ripped from their bolts. Walls bore the same deep gouges we'd seen in the main corridors. But here they were more concentrated, more furious. In what must have been a common area, we found a pile of what looked like bones, not neatly arranged but scattered, gnawed. Ortiz knelt, his helmet light illuminating the grim tableau. "Captain," he said, his voice unusually strained, These aren't all animal bones." I moved closer, my stomach churning. They were old, calcified, fused to the tile by years of moisture and decay. But even in their ancient state, the distinction was clear. Some were recognizable fragments of cervine or bovine skeletons, typical prey animals. But others were too thick, too long, with ridges and contours that didn't fit. And a few, unmistakable in their grotesque familiarity, were fragments of human ribs, a shattered pelvis, and what looked like a half-eaten femur. The ends were scored, chewed, not by standard predation, but by something that had ripped and torn with brutal efficiency. A sickening realization began to coalesce in the pit of my stomach. The reinforced doors, the impossible claw marks, the pervasive feral smell mixed with human decay. This wasn't a research facility that had gone dormant. This was a place where something terrible had happened, something that had transformed this sterile environment into a charnel house. The silence grew heavier, pressing in on us. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the presence of silence, a vast waiting void that seemed to absorb our very breaths. The distant hum of the generators was the only anchor to reality, a monotonous beat in a world gone mad. But even that began to feel less like a reassuring pulse and more like a countdown. We were deep inside, a mile under solid rock and frozen earth. Whatever had done this, whatever had gnawed on these bones was far from gone. The echoes in these cold remains weren't just historical. They felt like a premonition. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that we were not alone. And whatever was lurking in the shadows of Echo 7 was still very much alive, and perhaps still very much hungry. The discovery of the bones shifted the mission's dynamic. No longer were we merely reconning a defunct lab. We were navigating a potential tomb, a scene of unimaginable horror. The initial clinical detachment of our training began to fray at the edges, replaced by a growing unease. We moved with heightened caution, every shadow a potential threat, every distant creak an imminent ambush. The air in the living quarters felt heavy, thick with the ghosts of screams long since silenced. I directed Ortiz to collect samples of the calcified remains, while Kearns scanned the perimeter for anything overlooked. My own attention was drawn to a small, water-damaged table in what appeared to be a common room. Amidst the debris, a small, leather-bound notebook lay half-dissolved by moisture and ancient stains. It looked like it had been discarded in a panic, perhaps dropped in a desperate flight. My gloved fingers carefully pried it open. The pages were brittle, sticking together, and much of the ink had bled, rendering the text illegible. But as I painstakingly separated a few pages, my helmet light illuminating the faded script, I found fragmented entries. They were handwritten, erratic, and steeped in a chilling scientific jargon that made my blood run cold. Subject 11A, manifesting extreme aggression. Cellular regeneration rates beyond theoretical, rapid tissue growth, anomalous bone density. Control protocols failing, sedative resistance increasing. Behavioral shifts observed, nocturnal restlessness, increased vocalization, guttural, unidentifiable. My breath hitched. This wasn't typical biowarfare research. This was something else. Something far more experimental, far more unnatural. Then, on a page stained darker than the rest, almost at the bottom, I found the words that sent a jolt of pure dread through me. They were barely discernible, but the phrases punched through the fog of scientific ambiguity with terrifying clarity. Phase 3, subject viability confirmed under lunar cycle. And below it another almost scratched out. Transformation linked to photoperiodic stimuli, heightened sensitivity, feral instincts dominant during full phase. I didn't need the rest. The words, fragmented as they were, painted a horrifying picture. Lycanthropy, government bioenhancement using animal DNA. It sounded like something out of a pulp horror novel, a bad B-movie plot. But here, in the oppressive silence of this buried facility, surrounded by gnawed bones and the pervasive stench of something both animal and human, it was a terrifying reality. I closed the notebook, the brittle pages crunching softly. My hand trembled, a subtle tremor that I tried to suppress. This wasn't an abandoned lab. This was where they had played God, tried to engineer a super soldier using primal animalistic traits, and instead had unleashed something unspeakable. The lunar cycle that explained the heat signatures returning after years of inactivity. It explained the deep, impossible claw marks. It explained the fear-filled barricades and the calcified remains. I keyed my comms, my voice a strained whisper. Bravo 4, pull back to the previous secure zone. We have new intel. This isn't just a containment scenario. This is an eradication mission, and whatever they created, it thrives under the moon. We're walking into a den, not a lab. A heavy silence followed, punctuated only by the crackle of static. No one joked, no one questioned. They had seen the bones, felt the oppressive atmosphere, smelled the pervasive stench. The implications of lunar cycle hung heavy in the air, a chilling harbinger of the monstrous truth. We had entered a place where science had breached a fundamental boundary, awakening something ancient and terrible. And now we were in its domain. The full terror of our mission, the true nature of the enemy, had just begun to unfurl, like a monstrous shadow lengthening in the dark. The intel from the notebook had a palpable effect on the team. The casual banter was gone, replaced by a grim silence, broken only by the sharp, methodical sounds of our movement. Every step was deliberate, every shadow scrutinized. We were no longer just soldiers. We were trespassers in a domain far older and more dangerous than any conventional battlefield. The air, already thick with dread, now hummed with a primal terror. We pushed deeper, navigating corridors that grew progressively more disturbing. The claw marks on the walls were no longer sporadic. They formed frantic, desperate patterns as if something immense had thrashed against them in a rage. We moved through what the schematics indicated as the medical bay. The reinforced door, bent inwards from some unimaginable force, hung precariously on its hinges. Inside, the room was a sterile nightmare. Stainless steel tables were overturned, medical instruments scattered and corroded. But it was the centerpiece that drew every eye, freezing us in our tracks. Suspended from the ceiling by heavy chains, hooked through what appeared to be both wrists, hung the specimen mentioned in the logs. It was a grotesque, impossible thing, roughly humanoid in shape, but with proportions horribly distorted. The torso was undeniably human, broad-shouldered with the remnants of muscle still visible beneath withered skin. But below the waist, the legs were digitigrade, bent backward like a wolf's, thick with sinew and ending in long, black claws that looked like sharpened obsidian. Its arms, too, were elongated, ending in hands that were more paw than human, the fingers tipped with those same deadly talons. The head, that was the worst part. The face had collapsed into a muzzle, a snout-like protrusion housing teeth like chisels, sharp and predatory. Its eyes, set deep within the skull, were dull, ambered orbs, fixed in a vacant stare. Even in death, or what we assumed was death, it radiated a horrifying, primal energy. It was neither fully man nor fully beast, but a monstrous, unholy synthesis of both. A collective intake of breath swept through our comms. No one spoke. The sheer, overwhelming wrongness of the creature held us captive. It was the physical manifestation of the terror we had only hinted at, the chilling culmination of the lunar cycle experiments. Kearns, ever the one to push boundaries, slowly approached it. "Captain, permission to assess," he murmured, his voice a strained whisper. I hesitated, a profound sense of unease gripping me. "But we were here for answers. Proceed with caution, Kearns. Do not make direct contact." He nodded, extending a gloved hand, the back of it barely brushing the specimen's chest. For a moment, nothing happened. The creature hung lifeless, a terrifying sculpture of failed ambition. Then, with a slow, agonizing effort that defied its apparent state, it exhaled. A long, steaming breath, visible in the chilled air, rolled out from its muzzle, smelling faintly of ancient rot and something else, something intensely alive, primal. My blood ran cold. The old monitors on the nearby consoles, long dead, flickered erratically, as if jolted by an unseen energy surge. Someone's helmet cam, capturing the scene, caught the ambered pupils of the specimen contracting to pinpoints, an unmistakable sign of a living, responding organism. The dullness in its eyes was gone, replaced by a momentary, terrifying flicker of awareness, of something watching us. A low, wet rattling sound emanated from its throat, a sound that didn't belong in this world, a sound I would never forget. Command's voice crackled over the comms again, a strange mix of urgency and almost disbelieving horror. "Bravo 4, confirm status. We're picking up anomalous energy spikes. Contain and extract the biological, immediately. Contain, extract." The words felt utterly meaningless in the face of what hung before us. This wasn't a biological sample. This was a nightmare given form, a sentinel of horrors yet to be unleashed. The air grew heavy, thick with a palpable tension. The creature, seemingly lifeless moments ago, felt suddenly, terrifyingly alive, its still form radiating a silent, predatory power. We hadn't found a dead experiment. We had found a hibernating horror, and Kearns's touch had just woken it up. The quiet hum of the generators now seemed to accelerate, no longer a heartbeat, but a rapidly intensifying pulse, signaling the end of our quiet apprehension and the beginning of outright terror. "Containment protocols are a bust, Command. This thing just breathed." Kearns's voice was strained, a thin edge of panic creeping in. But before Command could respond, before any of us could fully process the impossible sight, the bunker convulsed. A deafening groan ripped through the facility, a deep, structural shriek that resonated in our bones. Then, with a violent final shudder, the ancient power grid surged. Lights exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging the entire complex into absolute suffocating darkness. For a heart-stopping moment, we were blind, deafened by the ringing in our ears, disoriented in the suffocating black. Then the emergency klaxons shrieked to life, a piercing, relentless wail that echoed through the labyrinthine corridors, a desperate cry of alarm that tore through the sudden silence. The strobing red lights of the emergency system flickered on, painting the scene in a hellish crimson. The suspended specimen in the medical bay was now a terrifying silhouette against the pulsing red, its amber eyes glinting malevolently in the intermittent glow. "Form up, defensive perimeter!" I barked, my voice barely audible above the klaxons, the metallic taste of fear suddenly sharp on my tongue. My team snapped into action, weapons raised, helmet lights cutting frantic arcs through the gloom. Our NVGs were struggling, the sudden power surge having partially fried their circuits. And then we heard it. Footsteps. Not the scuttling of rats, or the drip-drip of water through damaged pipes. Not the heavy, deliberate tread of our own boots. These were different. Heavy, yet uneven. Bipedal, but with a strange loping gait, a shuffling, dragging cadence that suggested immense weight struggling against an unnatural form. It sounded like something huge, walking upright, but something that had to constantly remind itself how to maintain that posture, as if its body was fighting against a more primal urge to drop to all fours. The sound resonated through Corridor C, just around the bend from our position. Thump drag. Thump drag. It grew closer, faster. The metallic tang in the air intensified, now acrid and raw, mingled with a new, horrifying element. Ozone from the fried circuits and something else. Something wet and meaty. "Contact, Corridor C. Multiple thermal signatures." Bravo 2's voice, Ortiz, exploded over the comms, laced with a raw terror I'd rarely heard. A burst of muzzle flashes erupted from his position, 3 round bursts cutting through the darkness. The rounds hit metal, sending a cascade of sparks dancing in the red emergency light. Whatever was out there, it was massive, and it was armored. Then came the roar. It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical force. A guttural, primal bellow that vibrated through the very concrete, shaking the ground beneath our feet. My teeth rattled in my skull. It wasn't just loud, it was felt. It was a sound of unbridled, ancient rage, a sound that conveyed not just aggression but a deep, ingrained hunger that chilled me to the marrow. The air itself seemed to growl, the walls humming with the monstrous vibration. Fall back to the main junction," I yelled, my heart hammering against my ribs. The generators, which had been a steady hum, now pulsed erratically, their rhythm mirroring the escalating panic in my chest. Echo 7 was no longer dormant. The labyrinth had awakened, and we, a dozen highly trained soldiers, were suddenly nothing more than mice trapped in a collapsing, blood-soaked maze. The hunt had begun, and we were the prey. The roar was a catalyst, plunging the bunker into absolute, unadulterated chaos. Muzzle flashes became desperate strobes in the crimson gloom, casting fleeting, monstrous shadows that danced on the walls. Our NVGs, barely functioning, rendered the world in a grainy, sickly green, but even that limited vision proved too much. Shapes, too large, too fast, too wrong, darted between the beams of our weapon lights. They moved with impossible agility, blurring past the periphery of our vision, a constant harassing presence. "Hold your fire unless you have a clear target," I bellowed into the comms, but my voice was lost in the cacophony of gunfire, screams, and that terrible, vibrating growl that seemed to emanate from the very structure of the bunker. The smell, already overwhelming, was now cloying, suffocating. Wet fur, iron, ozone, and the distinct, unmistakable odor of fear, both ours and something far more primal. We were trying to fall back, but it was like fighting through a nightmare. The creatures, and there were more than one, thermal readouts from what little working equipment we had confirmed multiple, fast-moving contacts, seemed to anticipate our movements, cutting off escape routes, pressing us deeper into the complex. Their movements were a horrific blend of animalistic speed and almost deliberate tactical precision. They were hunting us, not just attacking, but hurting. Then, for a terrifying, agonizing second, I saw one clearly. Ortiz, trying to clear a path, lobbed a flashbang grenade. It detonated with a blinding, ear-splitting report, momentarily washing the corridor in an incandescent white light. And in that brilliant, searing flash, it was there. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, a towering, hulking mass of muscle and matted gray fur, soaked dark at the chest with what I prayed was fluid from the ducts. Its shoulders were impossibly wide, broader than any man's, a grotesque parody of human physique. Its arms were too long, dangling almost to its knees, ending in hands that were not hands but monstrous paws tipped with claws that gleamed wetly in the fleeting light. They were black, jagged, and impossibly sharp. The face. Dear God, the face. It wasn't a wolf's head, not exactly. And it wasn't human. It was something in between, caught in a permanent, agonizing state of flux. Muscle rippled violently under the skin, shifting, contorting, as if it couldn't decide whether to be man or beast. The muzzle was elongated, but the brow was still too human, too intelligent. Its teeth, bared in a silent snarl, were like ivory daggers, but it was the eyes that truly seared themselves into my memory. Amber, piercing, and filled with an intelligence that was far more chilling than any feral rage, malice, calculation, a primal, unyielding hunger. It looked right at me, and in that brief, horrifying eye contact, I knew it wasn't just a monster. It was a sentient, thinking predator. My training took over. Every instinct screamed kill. I squeezed the trigger, emptying a full mag from my M4 into its massive chest. Rounds tore into the matted fur, punching dark holes into its flesh. But it didn't fall. It didn't even flinch. For a split second, it seemed to absorb the impact. Then, with an impossible burst of speed, it leapt sideways, scrambling along the ceiling like a monstrous spider. Its claws tore through the metal ductwork with a shriek of tortured steel. And then it was gone, vanishing into the overhead shadows with a sound like tearing metal and a low, rattling growl that echoed the one I heard months later in my nightmares. Fall back now, I screamed, my voice raw. The sheer impossibility of what I had just witnessed, its resilience, its speed, its deliberate, intelligent movement. It shattered every preconceived notion I had about biological threats. This was not a lab animal gone feral. This was something engineered, something unnatural, something that understood us, hunted us, and felt no pain. We were no longer fighting for answers. We were fighting for our lives. The retreat was brutal. The creatures pressed us relentlessly, appearing from impossible angles, using the dark, cavernous space to their advantage. Their roars, now closer, more frequent, were less primal challenges and more guttural signals, a terrifying form of communication that coordinated their hunt. We were being pushed, funneled into deeper, darker sections of Echo7. Elevator shaft! Get to the elevator shaft! I yelled into the comms, hoping against hope for a way out. Our original extraction point, our only vertical egress, was our last chance. The thought of climbing back through the breach we'd cut felt like a death sentence. We fought our way through a narrow corridor, muzzle flashes providing sporadic illumination against the shadowy forms. One of the men from Bravo 2, a young tech named Rodriguez, went down with a gurgle, dragged into a ventilation shaft before anyone could react. His helmet camera, still transmitting, showed a terrifying blur of fur and claws before it went dark. When we finally reached the main elevator shaft, a collective gasp of despair went through the remaining team. The lift was disabled, jammed somewhere far above us. But it wasn't just stuck. The massive steel cables, thick as my arm, were shredded. Not cleanly cut by a powerful industrial tool, but ripped apart. Strands of metal splayed outwards like mangled wire. The sheer force required to do that. It defied belief. No human could accomplish it. No machine we knew of. "It's no good, Captain." Miller's voice was hoarse, edged with raw terror. "The lift is totaled. Nothing's moving it." The silence that followed was deafening, more terrifying than any roar. We were trapped. There was no way up. The creatures had sealed our escape methodically, intelligently. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just reacting to us, they were orchestrating. Command, we're cut off from extraction. Elevator shaft compromised, cables shredded, requesting new evac parameters. I barked into my comm, but the response was nothing but static, punctuated by the faint, distant screams of other teams and the chilling phrase, multiple contacts moving between thermal layers, herding, down, herding. That word. It confirmed my worst fears. The bunker had 3 sublevels. Whatever these things were, they were driving us downwards deeper into their territory, into the heart of this buried nightmare. All right, Bravo 4, listen up, I projected, trying to maintain a semblance of control, my voice cracking slightly. We have one option, backup escape route to Containment Wing Delta. It's rough, but it leads to a lower-level emergency egress. It's our only way out. No one argued. The alternative was to stand and die, picked off one by one in this metal tomb. The path ahead was dark, unknown, but the path behind was blocked by impossible, shredding power. As we turned, leaving the mangled elevator shaft behind, I caught a fleeting glimpse of something in the shadows at the far end of the corridor. 2 amber eyes, glinting with a predatory satisfaction, before they vanished. We were moving deeper, following the shredded path, not escaping, but being led. And every step took us closer to whatever horrors lay waiting in the depths of Echo7. The journey to Containment Wing Delta was a descent into an ever-deepening hell. The corridors grew narrower, the air heavier, more stagnant, choked with that sickly sweet smell of decay and wet fur. The emergency lights here were sporadic, often completely dark, forcing us to rely on our failing NVGs and the desperate beams of our weapon lights. The creatures continued to harass us, darting in and out of the shadows, their guttural snarls echoing from all directions, never fully revealing themselves, just enough to instill constant terror. We finally breached the entrance to Containment Wing Delta, the heavy blast door hanging askew, bent inward as if a giant fist had slammed it. The sight within made even the most hardened among us falter. Dozens of cages, rows upon rows of them, lining the walls of what must have been a massive holding facility. But they weren't intact. Some were mangled, twisted from the inside out, steel bars peeled back like tin foil. Others were simply broken open, their doors ripped off, leaving gaping, dark apertures. The floor was a battlefield of destruction, scattered with equipment, shattered glass, and a horrifying carpet of bones, skeletons, everywhere. Some were unmistakably human, lying in contorted positions within the broken cages or sprawled on the floor, their clothes long since rotted away, leaving only bleached bone. But intermingled with them, often larger, more robust, were others. These were grotesque, skulls with elongated muzzles, limb bones of impossible thickness, rib cages that were far too wide, far too powerful for any human. They were malformed, mutated, a chilling testament to the unnatural experiments that had taken place here. Ortiz gagged, turning his head sharply. Miller simply stared, his jaw slack. Kearns, who had been muttering scripture sporadically since the initial attack, stopped entirely, his gaze fixed on a particular cage. "Oh, God," he whispered, his voice trembling so violently it barely registered over the comms. I moved towards him, my eyes scanning the macabre scene. On the ankle of one of the malformed skeletons, partially hidden under a collapsed gurney, was a small plastic tag. I knelt, wiping away the grime. It read, Subject 14B, another nearby, Subject 16C, and then, on a set of distinctly human remains, a tag scrawled in faded marker, Lunar Positive. The full, horrifying scope of Echo7's purpose slammed into us. These weren't just biologicals. These were the victims, the experiments, the twisted successes and failures of a project that had sought to weaponize primal transformation. The lunar cycle wasn't just a trigger for activity, it was the very key to their monstrous existence. The images from the notebook, the scientific jargon, The very word, lycanthropy, they all converged into this one grotesque reality. Kearns began to weep openly, his shoulders shaking, his M4 clattering uselessly against his side. "Forgive us, Father, for we have sinned," he mumbled, his voice rising in pitch. "They were trying to make soldiers, not beasts, not abominations." "Kearns, get a grip," I hissed, my own composure fraying. "We're not out of this yet." But even as I said it, a profound, chilling despair washed over me. We had walked into a tomb, awakened its residents, and now we were surrounded by the evidence of their horrifying creation. The monsters we were fighting weren't just animals. They were once human, or something close to it. A scraping sound, faint but distinct, echoed from the ventilation shafts above us. It was heavy, rhythmic, moving closer. The creatures were here in the containment wing, and they were aware of our presence. Their hunting grounds, their birthplace, their mausoleum. This wasn't just a place of confinement. It was a lair, and we were trapped within it, surrounded by the echoes of confinement and the hungry silence of the recently unleashed. The scraping grew louder, echoing from the metal ducts above us, a rhythmic shriek that grated on our nerves. Kearns, still muttering, suddenly snapped. His head whipped up, his eyes wide with terror, not seeing but hearing something beyond our perception. "They're coming! They're everywhere!" he shrieked, raising his M4 and firing wildly upwards, a desperate, uncontrolled burst into the dark, unseen ceiling. It was the last thing he did, before the last brass casing could hit the floor. A massive, dark shape detached itself from the ventilation shaft directly above Kearns. It dropped with impossible speed and bone-jarring impact, slamming into him with a weight that was not just heavy, but utterly crushing. We heard the sickening crack of his ribs, a sound that sliced through the cacophony of the klaxons. Kearns crumpled, a strangled gasp escaping his lips. The creature was immense, a blur of matted fur and savage power. Its head, a grotesque fusion of human and bestial, dipped down. In one swift, brutal motion, it tore Kearns's throat out, a sickening, wet, ripping sound, followed by a geyser of blood that splattered across the grimy walls. Kearns twitched once, a final convulsive shudder, and then went still, his lifeless eyes staring vacantly at the ceiling. Then, the beast threw its head back and howled. It wasn't merely an animalistic cry. It was a sound that tore through my very soul, a horrifying, guttural mix of human scream and primordial animal roar. It was a sound of agony and triumph, of ancient hunger and fresh kill. It vibrated through the air, through the floor, through every nerve in my body, locking me in place, paralyzed by an instinctual, all-consuming terror. It was the sound of a monster, truly unleashed. "Fire! Fire!" I screamed, breaking free of the paralysis, my voice ragged. We unloaded everything we had. M4s chattered, shotgun slugs ripped through the air, even incendiary rounds arced towards the beast. The creature, still hunched over Kearns's body, absorbed the onslaught. Rounds tore into its fur, making it twitch, making it snarl, but it didn't fall. Its amber eyes, now burning with a furious, intelligent rage, seemed to glow in the dim light. It took the hits, seemingly shrugging them off, a horrifying testament to its impossible resilience. The smell of burnt fur mingled with fresh blood, a sickening perfume of death. We fired until our magazines were dry, until the heat from our barrels shimmered in the air. Finally, a lucky shot from Ortiz, a shotgun slug, caught it squarely in one of its glowing amber eyes. The creature let out a truncated, pained shriek, a sound that was far too human. It staggered back, twitching violently before collapsing into a writhing heap, its immense body thrashing against the floor. For a moment it was still, but the moment of relief was fleeting. From every shadow, from every broken cage, from every dark aperture in the wall, they came, dozens of them, crawling, running, climbing the twisted metal, some on all fours, their powerful digitigrade legs propelling them with terrifying speed. Others, like the one that had killed Kearns, lumbered upright, their movements a horrifying, loping parody of human gait. Their forms seemed to shift and ripple under their skin, a constant agonizing transformation that never quite settled, never quite finished. Some were thickly matted with fur. Others had patches of pale, taut skin stretched over bulging muscle. All of them had those burning amber eyes. The containment wing was a nightmare incarnate. We weren't just fighting a monster. We were fighting an army of them, an army of horrors, engineered and twisted, unleashed in a primal fury. Our ammunition was dwindling fast, our numbers even faster. We were surrounded, overwhelmed, and every fiber of my being screamed one undeniable truth. We were not going to make it out of Echo7 alive. The primal howl still echoed in my ears, a promise of impending doom. The battle in Containment Wing Delta was a blur of muzzle flashes, guttural roars, and the desperate primal screams of my men. The creatures were relentless, swarming us from every angle. Their forms shifted and rippled, making them appear almost liquid in the dim, strobing emergency lights. One moment, a hulking bipedal figure. The next, a low-slung, four-legged beast, moving with impossible speed and ferocity. Their claws, sharp as razors, tore through body armor, as if it were tissue paper. Their teeth, like chisels, ripped flesh from bone with brutal efficiency. We fought until our ammunition was critically low. The click of an empty magazine, a death knell in the chaos. Miller went down, torn apart by 3 of the beasts before Ortiz could even reach him. The medic, his leg mangled, kept firing. A silent, grim determination etched on his face, but it was clear he wouldn't last much longer. "Fall back! Last lab! Move!" I roared, my voice raw, straining to be heard above the carnage. We had seen it on the schematics, a final, heavily reinforced research chamber at the very end of the containment wing. Our last, desperate hope for sanctuary. Ortiz. The medic and I broke free from the melee, sprinting through the narrow, blood-slicked corridors, the snapping jaws and clawed hands of the creatures nipping at our heels. The air was thick with the stench of fear, blood, and burning fur. My lungs burned. My muscles screamed in protest, but the primal urge to survive propelled me forward. We reached the heavy blast door of the final lab. It was a solid steel bulkhead, designed to withstand a direct hit. "Ortiz, cover fire! Medic, help me with the lock!" I yelled, fumbling with the manual override, my fingers slippery with sweat and grime. Ortiz unleashed a final, desperate burst from his M4, emptying his last magazine into the onrushing horde. The creatures shrieked, momentarily held back by the barrage. The medic, his face pale with pain, slammed his weight against the heavy lever, his injured leg giving out. Together with a groan of straining metal, the bulkhead began to close. The creatures were on us in an instant, a wave of fur and teeth. A massive clawed hand, impossibly strong, slammed against the closing door, trying to pry it open. Another slipped through the narrowing gap, its talons scraping against the metal, desperately seeking purchase. We shoved, grunted, pushing with every ounce of our remaining strength. With a final, agonizing lurch, the heavy steel door slammed shut. The thud reverberated through the corridor, momentarily silencing the bestial cries. But the relief was fleeting. Even through the thick steel, we could hear them. The thudding, the scraping, the guttural snarls. The door itself began to groan, bending inward almost immediately, a testament to the immense, relentless force being applied from the outside. The creatures wanted in. They weren't just trying to kill us. They were trying to get to what was inside. We leaned against the bulkhead, chests heaving, adrenaline coursing through our veins. The metallic tang of blood filled my mouth. Ortiz slumped to the floor, panting, his weapon useless. The medic, clutching his leg, was barely conscious. We had bought ourselves seconds, maybe minutes. But the sound of the steel bending, the scraping claws, the wet, rattling growls. It was a countdown to our inevitable end. We were trapped in the last chamber, our sanctuary becoming our tomb. And the hunger outside was growing. The bulkhead groaned under the assault, steel bending inward with agonizing slowness. Every new thud, every fresh scrape of claws against metal, echoed the inevitable. They would get through. Our sanctuary was a temporary reprieve, a final staging ground before the end. Inside the lab, the air was cold, sterile, contrasting sharply with the warm, blood-soaked corridor outside. Rows of cryopods lined the walls, at least a dozen of them, each a vertical coffin of frosted glass and humming machinery. My weapon light swept across them, revealing the terrifying truth. Some held human forms, suspended in a translucent icy fluid. Others were caught midway through the grotesque transformation, bodies contorted, skin rippling, limbs already elongating, faces partially collapsed into nascent muzzles. They were like monstrous fetal exhibits, frozen mid-metamorphosis. Ortiz, slumped against the door, managed a choked sound. The medic, fading in and out of consciousness, let out a soft whimper. The sheer scale of the horror, the culmination of decades of forbidden experiments, was laid bare before us. Then, my light fell on one particular pod. It was cracked, a jagged fissure running down its length, the glass heavily frosted from within. A strange, rhythmic thumping sound emanated from it. I approached, compelled by a morbid curiosity, wiping a patch of the frosted glass with my gloved hand. Behind the cleared glass, a hand slammed against the inside. Not a human hand. 5 long, slender fingers, tipped with claws black as obsidian, the nails clicking against the glass like knives. The skin was pale, taut, stretched over bulging muscle with patches of fine, dark fur beginning to sprout. And then, the face. It wasn't a full muzzle, not yet, but the lips were pulled back, the teeth elongated sharp, and the eyes, those amber, intelligent eyes, burning with a furious, primal hunger, stared directly into mine. Its mouth moved, a silent, agonizing word forming on its lips. I swore, in that moment I heard it whisper, a dry, raspy sound that resonated deep within my bones. Hungry. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a subject. This was an intelligent entity, aware, waiting. This was a nightmare trapped, ready to be unleashed. I turned, my hand already fumbling for my comms, my mind racing with a desperate need to report what we had found, what they had unleashed. "Command, this is Bravo 4. We found—" Before I could key the mic, before I could finish the sentence, the overhead ventilation shafts directly above us exploded inward. Metal shrieked, rebar snapped, and a torrent of rust, dust, and something wet and dark rained down. Figures dropped from the newly formed holes. Not one, not two, but a cascading wave of them, their forms blurring in the crimson emergency lights. Their amber eyes burned like embers in the darkness. Everything went red. The screams of Ortiz and the medic were cut short. A searing pain tore through my shoulder, then my leg. I remember muzzle flashes, the scent of burning fur, the wet, rattling growl filling my ears, consuming everything. I remember falling, struggling, a monstrous claw tearing at my suit, at my flesh. I don't remember how I got out. The next thing I knew, I was lying in a med tent at Malmstrom Air Base, wrapped in silver emergency blankets, my hands bandaged, my body a tapestry of lacerations and bruises. They said I was found 2 miles from Site Echo7, wandering barefoot in the snow, my tactical gear shredded, as if I'd crawled through barbed wire. Of my 12-man team, I was the only one recovered. The official line given to the press, to the public, was industrial collapse and fire. But I saw the thermal footage before they locked it away in deep storage. Figures moving through the smoke, impossibly tall, lean, and fast, not fleeing the disaster. Hunting. A week later, they sealed Echo 7 with thermite and explosives, burying it under tons of rock and ice. But at night, in my quarters on base, I still hear it. Heavy steps, pacing just beyond the floodlights. And last month, 2 MPs disappeared from perimeter watch. They blamed wolves, but the bite marks were too wide, the spacing too human. I've looked into the files since then, what little I can find. The early tests were meant to weaponize regenerative traits in wolves, to create soldiers that could heal, adapt, survive freezing conditions. The formula used a viral vector triggered by circadian and lunar cycles. It worked. Too well, the subjects became something else. When control failed, they sealed the bunker and buried it. But the infection didn't die. It hibernated. That's what we woke up in November 2025. I don't expect anyone to believe this, but I can't keep pretending it was just trauma, just a fire. The night after debrief, I woke up to the sound of claws on concrete right outside the decon chamber. When I looked, there were prints in the frost, too big for any animal, shaped like a human foot but ending in talons. And the smell, that same wet feral musk mixed with human sweat. I know what I saw down there, what tore through my team. It wasn't a mutation. It wasn't a virus gone wrong. It was the oldest predator, dressed in flesh we tried to engineer and failed to contain. Call it what the reports won't. Call it what it really was. A lobosomum, a werewolf, and it's still out there. If you braved this journey into the depths of Echo 7 with me, thank you. If the chill is still lingering, hit that like button. Let me know in the comments below. From what city or country are you watching this? And tell me, have you ever heard local legends of lobosomums, werewolves, or strange creatures in your region? Share your stories. I'm always listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more tales that lurk in the shadows. And hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next descent into darkness. Until next time, stay safe and watch the full moon.